"What's wrong, Captain? Can't even stand without help." The teenager's cruel taunt sliced through the tranquil morning air as 75-year-old retired Captain Marcus Winters struggled to regain his balance, his specialized cane clattering across the park's concrete path after being deliberately kicked from his grasp. Marcus steadied himself against an oak tree, his weathered face impassive, but his eyes, still sharp as a falcon's despite his years, flashed with a cold, controlled fury. That would have made his former subordinates snap to attention. The teens high-fived and howled with laughter, oblivious to the swift reckoning their actions would summon. 20 minutes later, the park perimeter buzzed with activity as military transport vehicles converged from all directions, and disciplined, squads of Marines established an unmistakable presence that turned the teenagers' smug expressions to masks of dread. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Marcus Winters, USMC, retired, carried himself with the quiet resilience of a man who had faced both battlefield chaos and life's unforgiving march of time with equal resolve. At 75, his once commanding physical presence had yielded somewhat to age and injury, his right leg permanently damaged from an IED explosion in Fallujah that had earned him both a Purple Heart and a lifetime of pain, managed without complaint. The specialized carbon fiber cane he relied upon was no ordinary support, but a sophisticated prosthetic aid designed specifically for combat veterans with his particular injuries. A testament to both modern medical innovation and his stubborn refusal to surrender his mobility or independence. His small craftsman home in the coastal town of Harborview stood as organized and meticulous as any barracks that had ever passed his inspection during his 32 years of service. Each morning followed a disciplined routine that began before dawn. Strong black coffee savored on his front porch while watching the neighborhood come alive, followed by 30 minutes of the modified physical therapy exercises that kept his damaged leg functional despite doctors' initial prognoses that he would never walk unassisted again. The walls of his study displayed not his considerable collection of medals and commendations. Those remained stored in a hand-carved mahogany box beneath his bed, but photographs of the Marines he'd led and mentored, many of whom still called him regularly, seeking his counsel or simply checking on the man who had guided them through the crucible of combat with unwavering integrity. Among his most treasured possessions was a faded photograph of his late wife, Eleanor, a Navy nurse who had tended his wounds when he was first evacuated from the field, beginning a love story that spanned 4 decades before cancer claimed her. 3 years ago, Marcus never spoke much about the classified operations in Somalia, the grueling months in Afghanistan's mountainous terrain, or the urban warfare tactics he'd pioneered that were still taught at Quantico. His community knew him simply as the dignified veteran who volunteered twice weekly at the local VA hospital, tended a magnificent vegetable garden that he shared generously with neighbors, and occasionally gave compelling talks at the high schools. History classes about the true cost and meaning of freedom, lectures that left even the most restless teenagers thoughtful and subdued. His daily constitutional through Harborview Memorial Park had begun as part of his rehabilitation protocol years ago, but had evolved into a cherished ritual. The 3-mile route took him past the Veterans Memorial, where he often paused in silent communion with fallen comrades, through groves of coastal pines that reminded him of training exercises at Camp Pendleton, and around the community pond, where local children fed ducks and elderly couples strolled hand in hand. The park represented everything he had fought to protect: peace, community, and the simple joy of everyday American life unfolding in safety. This particular Wednesday had dawned crisp and clear, the kind of morning that made Marcus grateful for each breath, each step, even those accompanied by the familiar ache in his damaged leg. He had set out slightly later than usual, having spent extra time on the phone with Lance Corporal Rivera's widow, assuring her that the VA paperwork he was helping navigate would eventually yield the benefits her family deserved. The delay meant the park was more populated than during his typical early morning visits, with mothers pushing strollers, remote workers taking advantage of the weather with laptops at picnic tables, and, as he would soon discover, a group of teenagers who should have been in school. Marcus noticed them from a distance, situational awareness being a habit that 3 decades of military service had rendered instinctual. 4 young men, perhaps 16 or 17, lounging on and around a picnic table near the park's central pavilion. Their postures radiated the distinctive combination of boredom and restless energy that often preceded poor decisions. They wore expensive athletic clothes that suggested comfortable upbringings at odds with their affected, tough postures, and their loud conversation carried across the otherwise peaceful park, punctuated by profanity that caused several parents to redirect their young children along different paths. Marcus didn't judge them harshly for typical teenage behavior. He'd raised 2 sons of his own and had commanded enough young Marines fresh from civilian life to understand the developmental journey from adolescent impulsivity to mature judgment. He simply adjusted his route slightly to maintain a respectful distance, his focus shifting to the vibrant late summer wildflowers bordering the path ahead. He might have passed without incident had one of the teens, a tall, lanky youth with an expensive haircut and designer sunglasses perched atop his head, not noticed the distinctive military bearing that Marcus maintained despite his age and injury. Something about the veteran's dignity seemed to trigger an insecurity in the boy, a need to establish dominance in front of his peers through the easiest target available. "Hey, check out G.I. Joe!" the teen called out, loud enough to ensure both his friends and Marcus would hear. Grandpa's still marching to war. Marcus continued his steady pace, neither accelerating nor acknowledging the comment. He had weathered far worse than teenage taunts throughout his life, and found it beneath his dignity to engage. This apparent indifference only intensified the teen's determination to provoke a reaction. "Yo, old-timer," the youth persisted, sliding off the picnic table and sauntering toward the path with exaggerated swagger. "Did you actually fight in the Civil War, or just World War I?" His friends snickered, emboldened by their leader's behavior and the absence of immediate consequences. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus continued forward, his expression neutral, his eyes focused ahead with the 1,000-yard stare that had intimidated seasoned warriors throughout his career, but registered as weakness to the ignorant young man now, deliberately blocking his path. "I'm talking to you, fossil," the teen said, planting himself directly in Marcus's way, forcing the veteran to stop. "What's with the fancy stick? Too good for a regular old man cane?" For the first time, Marcus made eye contact with his antagonist, his gaze so steady and penetrating that the teen involuntarily took half a step backward before catching himself and doubling down on his bravado. "I'd prefer to pass without incident, young man," Marcus stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded attention on battlefields across 3 continents. "There's plenty of park for everyone to enjoy." This reasonable response seemed to infuriate the teen, whose fragile ego interpreted anything short of intimidation as victory. His friends had now gathered behind him, forming an audience that demanded escalation rather than retreat. "Or what, old man? You'll report me to the park ranger?" he sneered, glancing back to ensure his friends were appreciating his performance. "What's this fancy stick made of anyway? Looks expensive." Before Marcus could react, the teen's foot lashed out in a swift, deliberate kick, striking the specialized cane precisely at its balance point, sending it flying from Marcus's grasp. The carbon fiber prosthetic aid clattered across the concrete, path, coming to rest several yards away beneath a park bench. The sudden loss of support sent a shock of pain through Marcus's damaged leg. Only decades of physical discipline prevented him from collapsing entirely as he lurched sideways, managing to catch himself against the rough bark of an ancient oak tree that bordered the pathway. His face remained composed through sheer force of will, though a thin sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead as he stabilized himself against the searing pain shooting from ankle to hip. "What's wrong, Captain? Can't even stand without help?" the teenager taunted, noticing the military haircut and bearing that marked Marcus as a veteran. The youth's friends erupted in cruel laughter, one of them recording the incident on his smartphone while another mimicked an exaggerated limping walk. "Maybe he needs his walker," another chimed in. "My grandma's got one with tennis balls on the bottom. Should we get you an upgrade, Pops?" In that moment, something cold and familiar settled in Marcus's chest. Not fear, not even primarily anger, but the crystalline clarity he had experienced in combat situations where objectives became simple and focus narrowed to tactical necessities. Part of him, the part that had led men through ambushes and artillery barrages, assessed the four teenagers with clinical precision, automatically identifying the weakest points and most efficient neutralization sequence should physical intervention become necessary. But Marcus was no longer that battle-hardened captain leading a company through hostile territory. He was a 75-year-old veteran who understood that true strength often manifested in restraint rather than reaction. The teenagers, for all their cruelty, were still developing humans who required correction rather than retribution. "You have no idea who I am or what this cane represents," Marcus stated, his voice level and controlled despite the continuing pain. "And that reflects poorly on your upbringing, not on me." The lead teenager's face flushed with angry embarrassment, his plan to provoke fear or pleading having failed entirely. "Whatever, man. You should watch where you're going." He kicked at the ground, sending gravel scattering across the path. "Come on, guys, this is boring." But another of the teens, emboldened by the lack of immediate consequences, wasn't finished. He sauntered over to where Marcus's specialized cane lay, picked it up, and pretended to examine it with exaggerated curiosity. "This thing looks military. Engraved. Probably cost more than my phone," he observed, testing its weight and flexibility. "Wonder if it floats." He glanced meaningfully toward the nearby pond. The situation might have escalated further had it not been for the intervention of a jogger who had witnessed the encounter while rounding the bend in the path. She was a compact, athletic woman in her 40s, with the unmistakable bearing of military service in her straight posture and alert eyes. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded, coming to an abrupt halt beside the teen holding the cane. "Give me that. Now." There was such command in her voice that the boy complied almost reflexively before his brain caught up with his actions. "We're just messing around," the lead teenager protested, his earlier confidence wavering slightly in the face of adult intervention. "He was in our way." The woman, wearing running clothes that revealed the Marine Corps emblem tattooed on her upper arm, ignored him completely, turning instead to Marcus with a respectful nod as she returned his cane. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, her voice shifting from steel to genuine concern. "I'm fine, Major," Marcus replied, recognizing her rank from subtle cues civilians would miss. "Thank you for the assist." She smiled briefly at his accurate assessment before turning back to face the teenagers, who were now attempting to slink away during the exchange. "Stop right there," she commanded, and something in her tone froze them mid-step. "You don't get to walk away from this." "Look, lady, we didn't do anything illegal," the lead teen protested, though with notably less swagger than before. "You can't make us stay here." You're right, she agreed, pulling out her smartphone. I can't legally detain you, but I can certainly record your faces. Report this incident to park security and ensure the footage of your behavior reaches the appropriate authorities, including your schools and parents. The mention of parents caused visible discomfort among the group, suggesting that their home consequences might be more significant than they wanted to admit. Whatever, the lead teen muttered, but the bravado had drained from his voice. We're leaving anyway. Have fun with your boyfriend, lady. As the teenagers skulked away, the woman turned back to Marcus, genuine concern evident in her expression. Captain Marcus Winters, isn't it? I attended your tactical urban warfare lecture at Quantico 3 years ago. Major Sophia Ramirez, currently stationed at Marine Barracks, Washington. Marcus nodded, carefully testing his weight on his injured leg before fully releasing his grip on the oak tree. Good memory, Major. That was shortly before my last consultation with the Corps. Your methods saved my unit during our second Mosul deployment, sir. Hard to forget the face behind those strategies. She glanced in the direction the teenagers had gone, her expression hardening. Those kids had no idea who they were disrespecting. Just as well, Marcus replied, adjusting his grip on his cane. A man's worth isn't measured by his rank or decorations. No, sir, she agreed, but it is measured by his character and service, both of which deserve better than what just happened. She hesitated briefly before continuing. I have some calls I could make. That kind of behavior shouldn't go uncorrected. Marcus considered this for a moment, weighing his natural inclination toward personal resolution against the broader principle at stake. These weren't just ordinary teenagers being thoughtlessly cruel to an elderly man, though that alone would merit correction. They had deliberately targeted a disabled veteran, mocking both his service and his sacrifice. The lesson they needed extended beyond himself to the fundamental values of respect and understanding of service that formed the backbone of the nation he had spent his life defending. Sometimes, he said finally, a more formal educational opportunity is warranted. Do you have connection to the local Marine Corps recruiting office, Major? A slow smile spread across Major Ramirez's face as she understood his intention. As a matter of fact, I'm having dinner with the commanding officer tonight. Staff Sergeant Jackson is quite innovative in his community outreach programs. Marcus nodded, decision made. Then perhaps you could mention this educational opportunity to him. I believe those young men would benefit from a more structured introduction to the meaning of service and sacrifice. Oh, consider it done, Captain, she replied, coming to attention briefly in a gesture of respect that meant more to Marcus than she could know. Will you be all right making it home? I could call someone. I've navigated rougher terrain with worse injuries, Major, he assured her with a slight smile, but I appreciate your concern. After exchanging contact information, Major Ramirez continued her run while Marcus resumed his walk, moving more carefully now as he managed the additional pain from his leg. The encounter had disturbed his usual peace, leaving him contemplating the disconnect between the sacrifices of those who served and the understanding of that service among portions of the civilian population they protected. Upon returning home, Marcus settled into his favorite leather armchair, elevating his throbbing leg as he'd been taught by countless VA physical therapists. The specialized cooling sleeve he applied helped reduce the inflammation caused by the unexpected strain. As he sat in contemplative silence, memories from decades of service flickered through his mind, the faces of young Marines he'd commanded, some who never returned home, all who had understood the weight and meaning of the oath they had taken. Those teenagers in the park had likely never encountered the reality of sacrifice that undergirded their freedom to behave so carelessly. Perhaps that was partly the point. Those who served did so precisely so that civilian youth could grow, up without intimate knowledge of warfare and its costs, but that distance didn't excuse such deliberate disrespect, especially when directed at the visible symbols of that sacrifice. Marcus reached for his secure phone, a specialized device provided to certain retired officers who maintained consultation relationships with active units. He rarely used it for personal matters, but this situation transcended the merely personal. This was about principles and education. He dialed a number from memory, and after 2 rings, a crisp voice answered. "Office of Strategic Community Relations, Gunnery Sergeant Foster speaking." "Ah, Gunny," Marcus said, his voice resuming the natural command presence that had defined his career. "Captain Marcus Winters, retired. I need to report an incident requiring immediate educational intervention regarding respect for veterans and understanding of service commitments." The brief pause on the other end conveyed immediate recognition. "Captain Winters, sir, what's your 20 and the nature of the situation?" The transition to operational terminology was automatic, a response to the authority still evident. In Marcus's voice, Marcus provided a concise, factual account of the incident at the park, including the approximate ages and descriptions of the teenagers involved, their likely civilian status, and the specific nature of their disrespect. He mentioned Major Ramirez's involvement and her connection to Staff Sergeant Jackson at the local recruiting office. "Understood completely, sir," Gunnery Sergeant Foster replied when Marcus had finished. "I believe we have an appropriate community engagement protocol for this scenario. Location confirmed. Consider it addressed with educational priority." "Appreciate your attention to this matter, Gunny," Marcus acknowledged. "Standard educational parameters apply. No excessive measures, just appropriate clarity regarding consequences and values." "Absolutely, sir. Respectful but impactful. That's our specialty." There was a pause before Foster added, "For what it's worth, sir, your tactical handbook is still required reading for our advanced training programs. It's an honor to assist you." The call concluded with mutual respect, and Marcus set about preparing a simple lunch, knowing that the Marines' response would be both measured and memorable. He understood the intricate network that connected current and former Marine Corps personnel, a brotherhood and sisterhood forged in shared sacrifice that remained vigilant in upholding the honor of their community, even in civilian contexts. Precisely 20 minutes after the initial call, as Marcus was finishing his sandwich, the quiet residential neighborhood around Harborview Memorial Park experienced an unexpected transformation. The first indication was the subtle but unmistakable sound of disciplined footsteps moving in coordinated formation, a sound distinct from the casual cadence of civilian movement. At the park's main entrance, 2 unmarked black suburban SUVs arrived simultaneously, parking with perfect precision on either side of the access road. From these vehicles emerged 8 Marines in immaculate service uniforms, moving with the disciplined efficiency that marked all their operations, whether combat or ceremonial. They established an initial perimeter with such natural authority that civilian visitors instinctively gave them space, watching with curious respect. Moments later, the distinctive rumble of military transport vehicles drew all eyes to the street as 3 tactical MRAP vehicles, painted in desert tan, turned onto the park access road, followed by 2 olive-drab transport trucks. Unlike a police response with flashes and sirens, this arrival was characterized by disciplined purpose and controlled presence, somehow more intimidating in its quiet efficiency than any amount of noise or flash would have been. The vehicles formed a precise semicircle around the park's central pavilion area, where the teenagers had been loitering earlier, and, as luck would have it, where they had returned after assuming the earlier incident was behind them. Their casual laughter died abruptly as they registered the overwhelming military presence now surrounding them. From the lead transport emerged a figure whose very posture commanded attention, Lieutenant Colonel James Barrett, commanding officer of the Marine, Corps Recruitment Battalion for the entire Eastern Seaboard region. At 6'4", with shoulders that strained against his impeccably tailored uniform, Barrett had the physical presence of a man born to lead, but it was the intelligence in his eyes and the measured precision of his movements that truly set him apart. He had received direct communication from both Major Ramirez and Gunnery Sergeant Foster regarding the educational opportunity at hand, and he had decided that this particular lesson warranted his personal attention. The four teenagers, who had been sharing stolen cigarettes and boasting about their earlier encounter with some old guy with a cane, fell into stunned silence as they watched the military precision unfold around them. The leader, a youth named Devon, whose father's wealth had insulated him from consequences his entire life, tried to maintain his air of indifference, but the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his growing unease. "Dude, what the hell is happening?" whispered one of his friends, a freckled boy named Tyler, who had been the one to suggest throwing the specialized cane into the pond. "Is this about that old man?" "No way," Devon replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "They wouldn't send the freaking Marines for something like that. It's probably just some recruitment thing or whatever." Their speculation ended abruptly as two Marines in dress blues approached with the synchronization that comes only from years of disciplined training. They moved with such calm authority that the teenagers found themselves automatically standing straighter, an unconscious response to the unmistakable presence of true authority. "Gentlemen," began the first Marine, a staff sergeant whose voice carried across the now silent park without needing to be raised. "Lieutenant Colonel Barrett requests your presence for an educational discussion regarding an incident that occurred here approximately 40 minutes ago. Please follow us." It wasn't technically an order. These were civilians, not military personnel. But something in the staff sergeant's tone made it clear that declining was not a realistic option. The teenagers exchanged nervous glances before Devon attempted to reassert his rapidly diminishing bravado. "We haven't done anything wrong," he protested, though his voice cracked slightly. "You can't make us go anywhere. My dad's a lawyer, and he—" "Your father's profession is indeed impressive," interrupted the staff sergeant with polite precision. "However, this is not a legal detention, but rather an educational opportunity that I believe would benefit both you and your father's understanding of community standards regarding respect for disabled veterans." The perfect politeness, somehow, made the implicit rebuke even more effective. "Of course, if you prefer, we can arrange for this discussion to include your parents and perhaps local law enforcement regarding the assault of a disabled veteran, which falls under specific legal statutes in this state." The mention of parents and law enforcement drained what little resistance remained. With slumped shoulders but wary compliance, the four teenagers followed the Marines to where Lieutenant Colonel Barrett stood waiting, his posture relaxed but commanding, his eyes evaluating each youth with the penetrating assessment of a man accustomed to judging character under pressure. "Thank you for joining this conversation," Barrett began, his voice carrying the natural authority of command without needing to be forceful. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel James Barrett, and I understand you gentlemen had an interaction earlier. Today with Captain Marcus Winters, retired." The teenagers shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding the ground, the sky, their shoes, anything more appealing to look at than the lieutenant colonel's steady gaze. We didn't know he was a captain," offered Tyler weakly. "I see," Barrett nodded thoughtfully. "And if you had known his rank, would that have changed your behavior?" The question hung in the air, revealing the flawed logic in the teen's excuse. Barrett didn't wait for an answer before continuing. "Let me tell you about Captain Marcus Winters." He gestured to a nearby picnic table. "Please, have a seat. This will be educational." As the teenagers reluctantly sat, they became aware of the perfect perimeter that had been established. Marines in utilities had created a respectful but unmistakable presence around the park's central area, redirecting civilian visitors with professional courtesy. The military vehicles remained positioned at strategic points, their very presence transforming the ordinary community park into a space where important lessons were about to be delivered with ceremonial gravity. "Captain Winters," Barrett began, his tone shifting to one of profound respect, "served this nation for 32 years in some of the most challenging combat environments human beings can endure. The specialized cane that you found amusing, enough to kick from his grasp, that's a prosthetic aid he requires because an improvised explosive device in Fallujah shattered his right leg while he was pulling 3 of his wounded Marines to safety under enemy fire." The teenager's expressions shifted from nervous defiance to uncomfortable realization as Barrett continued. "That action earned him his 2nd Purple Heart and would have earned him a Navy Cross had the operation not been classified. The man you mocked as unable to stand without help once held his position for 17 hours after being wounded, directing his company's defense while applying his own tourniquet. 13 Marines returned to their families because of decisions he made while in excruciating pain." Devon, the ringleader, swallowed hard, the first genuine flicker of shame crossing his face. "We didn't know." "That's precisely the point, son," Barrett interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. "You didn't know, and you didn't bother to consider, that there might be more to that man and his specialized cane than what was immediately visible to you. That failure of imagination and empathy is what we're addressing today." Barrett signaled to one of his officers, who approached carrying a rugged tactical case. Opening it revealed a display of medals and commendations, not Marcus's actual decorations, but identical representations used for educational purposes. "This is what Captain Winters earned through decades of service and sacrifice," Barrett explained, indicating each medal. "This bronze star with Combat V for valor under fire in Somalia, this Purple Heart from Afghanistan, this one from Iraq. These campaign medals representing years of his life spent in hostile territory, so that you could enjoy the freedom to spend a Wednesday morning in a peaceful park without fear." He closed the case carefully before continuing. "The man you mocked lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago. Eleanor Winters was a Navy nurse who saved countless lives. Captain Winters now volunteers 20 hours a week at the VA hospital, helping other veterans navigate their benefits and rehabilitation. The vegetables he grows in his garden feed 3 local families experiencing food insecurity, though he's too humble to mention it." Each revelation landed like a physical weight on the teenagers' shoulders, their postures progressively more hunched under the growing understanding of whose dignity they had casually assaulted. We didn't mean," Tyler began, his voice trailing off as he realized the inadequacy of any excuse. "Intent matters," Barrett acknowledged, "but impact matters more. Your actions, whatever their intent, showed profound disrespect not just to Captain Winters personally, but to the values of service and sacrifice that thousands have died to uphold." The lieutenant colonel's expression softened slightly, recognizing the developmental stage of the young men before him. "You're at an age where you're figuring out what kind of men you want to become. Today's choices don't define you permanently, but they do set you on a path. The question is whether today becomes a turning point toward better understanding or just another step in the wrong direction." He gestured toward the Marine contingent surrounding them. "Every Marine here has stories similar to Captain Winters. Some bear visible wounds, others invisible ones. All have committed themselves to something larger than their own comfort or convenience, Not because they're superhuman, but because they understood that meaningful lives are built on service to others and adherence to principles that transcend personal preference. Devon, whose arrogance had melted into genuine remorse, finally met Barrett's gaze directly. "What? What happens now, sir?" The "sir" emerged naturally, respect beginning to replace the reflexive defiance that had characterized his earlier behavior. "Now," Barrett replied, "you have an opportunity to demonstrate that you're capable of learning and growth. Captain Winters doesn't want punishment or retribution. He requested education, a chance for you to understand the community you're part of and the responsibilities that come with it." He turned to another officer who stepped forward with 4 folders. "These contain information about our community service program for young civilians. 2 days at the VA hospital volunteering alongside veterans like Captain Winters, learning their stories, understanding their challenges, and perhaps gaining perspective that will serve you throughout your lives." The teenagers accepted the folders with unexpected reverence, the weight of the opportunity slowly dawning on them. "This is not mandatory," Barrett clarified. "You're civilians, and we have no authority to compel your participation. However, I will say that Captain Winters specifically requested we offer you this opportunity rather than pursuing other avenues that might have more permanent consequences for your records and futures." The implied alternative hung in the air. The legal ramifications of assaulting a disabled veteran, the potential impact on college applications, the community response if video of their behavior circulated. The educational opportunity suddenly seemed not just reasonable, but generous. "Additionally," Barrett continued, "I believe you owe Captain Winters a sincere apology. Not because anyone's forcing you, but because it's the right thing to do. He's currently at home resting as your actions exacerbated the chronic pain he lives with daily as a result of his injuries. If you're willing, we can transport you there now." The 4 teenagers exchanged glances before Devon surprisingly took the lead. "Yes, sir. We'd like to apologize in person. And—" he glanced at the folder in his hands. "I think I speak for all of us when I say we want to do the volunteer program too." His friends nodded in somber agreement, their earlier bravado replaced by genuine reflection. "Very well," Barrett nodded, appearing neither surprised nor particularly impressed. This was, after all, the minimum decent response to the situation. "We'll transport you to Captain Winters' home. I should mention that this educational opportunity has drawn some attention." For the first time, the teenagers became aware of the small crowd of park visitors who had gathered at a respectful distance, many recording the scene on their phones. What had begun as an impulsive act of disrespect was becoming a very public lesson in accountability and values. The drive to Marcus's home was conducted with military efficiency. The teenagers transported in one of the olive-drab trucks with bench seating, accompanied by 2 Marines whose silent presence reinforced the seriousness of the occasion. Through the vehicle's windows, they could see their community transformed by the Marine presence, neighbors standing on porches, pedestrians stopping to watch the procession, all witnessing this unusual but powerful form of community accountability. At Marcus's modest craftsman home, the teenagers were escorted to the front door by Lieutenant Colonel Barrett himself, their nervousness palpable as they stood on the porch of the man they had so carelessly disrespected hours earlier. Marcus opened the door before they could knock, his decades of situational awareness having alerted him to their arrival. He stood tall despite the visible pain in his stance, refusing the cane for this moment, unwilling to remind them of their cruelty, but inadvertently making its impact more evident in the careful way he balanced his weight. "Captain Winters," Barrett greeted him with the crisp respect of one officer to another, "these young men have something they'd like to say to you." Marcus's gaze moved from Barrett to each teenager in turn, his eyes revealing neither anger nor satisfaction, just the patient assessment of a man who had seen humanity at both its worst and its finest. Devon, to his credit, stepped forward first, his earlier arrogance completely dissolved. "Sir," he began, his voice unsteady with genuine emotion, "I want to apologize for my behavior today. It was disrespectful and cruel, and you deserved better. I didn't understand, but that's no excuse. I'm truly sorry." Each teenager followed with their own apology, halting and uncomfortable, but sincere in its delivery. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression unchanging until all had spoken. "Apologies accepted," he said finally, his voice steady and dignified. "Making mistakes isn't what defines us. How we respond to them does." He looked at the folders in their hands. "I see Lieutenant Colonel Barrett has explained the volunteer opportunity at the VA. Having young people understand what service and sacrifice actually mean is more important to me than any personal amends. If you're sincere about participating, I believe everyone will benefit." The atmosphere shifted subtly, the formality of apology evolving into something more constructive as Marcus continued. "There are veterans at that hospital who haven't had visitors in months. Some fought in conflicts most civilians have forgotten. All of them signed the same blank check to their country that I did, up to and including their lives. They have stories worth hearing and wisdom worth considering." Something in Marcus's calm dignity affected the teenagers more profoundly than even the impressive military display at the park had. Here was authentic strength, not the counterfeit dominance they had aspired to in their bullying, but the genuine fortitude that came from character tested by real challenges. "We'll be there, sir," Devon promised, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. "And thank you for giving us this chance instead of pressing charges or something." Marcus nodded acknowledgement. "Second chances matter. I've needed a few myself over the years." He glanced at Barrett with the subtle communication that passes between those who have shared similar experiences. "The Lieutenant Colonel has my contact information if you have any questions about the program. I look forward to seeing you there." As the teenagers were escorted back to the transport vehicle, Barrett remained behind for a moment with Marcus. "Impressive young men underneath it all," Marcus observed quietly. "Just needed some course correction." Barrett smiled slightly. "Most do at that age. It's finding the right method that's the challenge." He glanced back at the military vehicles lining the quiet residential street. "Was this response proportionate, do you think? Proportionate to the offense? Perhaps not," Marcus admitted. "But proportionate to the importance of the lesson? Absolutely." As Barrett prepared to leave, he asked one final question that had been on his mind. "You could have handled this yourself, Captain. I've read your service record. Those boys wouldn't have stood a chance if you'd decided to address it personally. Why call us?" Marcus considered this, leaning slightly against the door frame as he shifted weight off his increasingly painful leg. "Because this wasn't about me or my individual dignity. It was about something larger, the principles of respect and understanding that bind a community together. Some lessons need to be delivered not just with authority, but with ceremony. You provided that today." Barrett nodded in understanding before departing with a respectful, "Semper Fi, Captain." "Semper Fi, Colonel," Marcus replied, watching as the impressive military contingent prepared for departure, having accomplished their mission of education with the same precision they brought to all their duties. Throughout Harborview, residents watched from windows and sidewalks as the marine vehicles departed with disciplined coordination. The community had witnessed something rare, the invisible bonds between those who serve becoming briefly, dramatically visible in defense not of territory but of values. The message was unmistakable. Respect for veterans wasn't merely a polite social convention, but a fundamental value worth protecting with institutional resources and public ceremony. As Marcus finally allowed himself to sink into his armchair and properly elevate his throbbing leg, he reflected on the day's events with measured satisfaction. The teenager's transformation had been genuine. He had seen enough insincere apologies in his lifetime to recognize the difference. Their volunteer service would likely reinforce today's lessons, potentially redirecting 4 young lives toward greater purpose and perspective. His phone rang, the secure line again. Answering, he heard Major Ramirez's voice. "Mission accomplished." "I hear," she said, a smile evident in her tone. "Lieutenant Colonel Barrett sends his regards. Apparently those kids are already asking about ways to support the VA hospital beyond their required hours." "Young people often rise to the expectations we set," Marcus replied. Barrett handled it perfectly, firm but constructive. "The response is going viral," Ramirez informed him. "Someone posted video of the Marines arriving at the park and the educational moment that followed. It's being shared as Marines surround park after teens mock disabled veteran." The comments section is overwhelmingly supportive. Marcus hadn't considered the digital afterlife of today's events, but he recognized its potential value. If it helps others understand the importance of respect and the reality of service, that's all to the good. It's already inspired 3 walk-in recruitment inquiries, Ramirez added. Young people wanting to know more about what it means to be a Marine. After concluding the call, Marcus turned his attention to the evening news playing quietly on his television. Sure enough, the local station had picked up the story, showing footage of the Marine vehicles surrounding Harborview Park and interviewing witnesses who described the powerful lesson in respect they had observed. The community's reaction was evident in the interviews, residents expressing appreciation for the visible demonstration that disrespect toward veterans, especially disabled ones, warranted serious response. Several mentioned planning to attend the upcoming Veterans Day ceremony for the first time, newly aware of the significance such recognition held. Marcus switched off the television, satisfied that today's response had transcended individual circumstances to reinforce communal values. The proportionality Barrett had questioned wasn't measured merely against the original offense, but against the opportunity to strengthen the social fabric that bound their community together, the invisible threads of respect, gratitude, and mutual obligation that made civilized society possible. As darkness fell, Marcus performed his evening routine with deliberate care, the additional pain from the day's events requiring extra attention to his physical therapy exercises. Settling finally into bed, he glanced at Eleanor's photograph on his nightstand. "Educational mission accomplished, Elle," he murmured to the smiling face of his late wife. "The next generation might be all right after all." The following morning dawned with unexpected consequences from the previous day's events. Marcus awoke to the gentle chime of his doorbell at precisely 07:30 hours. Years of military routine had him already dressed and halfway through his first cup of coffee, despite the additional discomfort in his injured leg. When he opened the front door, he found a smartly dressed woman in her early 50s standing on his porch, her professional demeanor suggesting municipal authority. "Captain Winters, I'm Councilwoman Diana Reeves. I hope I'm not calling too early." She extended her hand with confident respect. "I wondered if we might speak briefly." Marcus invited her in, curious about this unexpected visit from a member of the city council. As they settled in his modest living room, the councilwoman came directly to the point. "Yesterday's events at Harborview Park have sparked quite a conversation in our community," she began, accepting the coffee Marcus offered. "The video has over 2 million views this morning, and my office has received dozens of calls and emails." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I hope that's not causing problems for the Marine Corps. Their response was at my request." "Quite the contrary. Councilwoman Reeves assured him. The community response has been overwhelmingly positive. People are calling it a masterclass in accountability and respect restoration. Could be, but it's highlighted something many of us on the council have been concerned about for some time: the disconnect between our veteran community and our younger citizens. She placed a folder on the coffee table between them. I'm here because we'd like to formalize and expand the educational program those young men are participating in. The City Council is prepared to fund a comprehensive Veterans Educational Engagement Initiative, with your guidance, if you're willing to provide it. Marcus opened the folder to find a preliminary proposal for a program that would connect local veterans with schools, community centers, and youth organizations. The initiative included historical education, service opportunities, and mentorship components. We've been trying to bridge this gap for years, Councilwoman Reeves explained, but yesterday demonstrated how powerful direct engagement can be. Those teenagers have already contacted my office, asking how they can help expand their volunteer commitment beyond the original agreement. Marcus studied the proposal with measured interest. Throughout his career, he had learned to evaluate opportunities based not on their immediate appeal, but on their potential for meaningful impact. This initiative seemed to offer genuine possibility. I appreciate the Council's interest, he replied, closing the folder. But why me specifically? There are many veterans in Harborview with administrative experience better suited to program development. The councilwoman smiled. Because you understood that yesterday wasn't about punishment or public shaming. It was about education and community values. The approach you chose demonstrated wisdom we'd like to incorporate into this broader initiative. After further discussion of the program's details and expectations, Marcus agreed to serve as an advisory consultant with the condition that the initiative focus on genuine understanding rather than superficial patriotic gestures. The councilwoman left with his commitment to attend the preliminary planning meeting the following week. No sooner had she departed than Marcus's phone rang again, this time his personal line. The caller was Devon's father, Richard Atherton, requesting permission to visit that afternoon. Marcus agreed with some reservation, uncertain whether to expect defensiveness or accountability from the parent of the teenager who had instigated yesterday's incident. Richard Atherton arrived precisely at the appointed time, driving an expensive European sedan that spoke of considerable financial success. Unlike his son's previous arrogance, however, the father exhibited only respectful gravity as Marcus welcomed him into the home. Captain Winters, thank you for seeing me, he began once they were seated. I wanted to personally apologize for my son's behavior and express my gratitude for the way you handled the situation. Noting Marcus's slightly surprised expression, Richard continued, I realize you might have expected me to be defensive or make excuses. There was a time when I might have. But Devon came home yesterday profoundly changed by his experience. He paused, choosing his words carefully. My son described the Marine response in detail, not just the impressive show of force, but more importantly, the emphasis on education rather than punishment. He said Lieutenant Colonel Barrett spoke about values and community responsibility in ways that finally got through to him. Marcus nodded. Barrett is an exceptional officer. He understood the objective perfectly, as did you in requesting that approach, Richard acknowledged. Devon told me you could have pressed charges that would have seriously impacted his future. Instead, you chose to give him an opportunity to learn and grow. The man's composure briefly faltered. As his father, I have to acknowledge my own failures here. I've given Devon every material advantage while perhaps neglecting the more important lessons about respect, service, and community responsibility. Your response has affected not just my son, but our entire family. The conversation shifted to Richard's own background, a successful corporate attorney whose grandfather had served in Korea but never spoke about his experiences. The disconnect between civilian prosperity and the sacrifices that secured it became increasingly evident as they talked. "Devon starts his volunteer service at the VA tomorrow," Richard said as their conversation drew to a close. "He's nervous but determined. I've asked to join him, not to supervise, but to learn alongside him. It seems long overdue." As Richard prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Captain, there's one more thing. After Devon told us what happened, I spoke with the parents of the other boys involved. We'd like to establish a scholarship fund for veterans' children at Harborview High School. If you'd consider serving on the selection committee, your perspective would be invaluable." Marcus accepted with quiet appreciation, recognizing that this parent, like his son, was demonstrating a capacity for growth and reflection that deserved encouragement. The incident that had begun with disrespect was catalyzing multiple forms of community healing and connection. The next morning brought another development as Marcus prepared for his regular volunteer shift at the VA hospital. A Marine Corps transport vehicle arrived at his home, and Major Ramirez herself stepped out in full-service uniform. "Captain Winters," she greeted him with a crisp salute. "Lieutenant Colonel Barrett sends his compliments and has assigned me to provide transportation assistance during your recovery period." Marcus recognized the underlying message. The Corps was aware that yesterday's incident had exacerbated his injury and was offering support without requiring him to ask for it, preserving his dignity while meeting his needs. "That's much appreciated, Major," he replied, returning her salute before carefully navigating the porch steps. "I believe we have some new volunteers to orient at the VA today." The ride to the VA hospital provided an opportunity for professional conversation between officers of different generations but shared values. Major Ramirez spoke of her current assignment training Marine Security Guard detachments for embassy duty, while Marcus shared insights from his experience leading similar units decades earlier. The 30-minute drive revealed both how much had changed in military operations and how fundamentally consistent the core principles of leadership remained. At the VA hospital, they found not just the 4 teenagers and Richard Atherton waiting, but a news crew from the local television station setting up for a segment on veteran community engagement. The story had continued to expand, drawing attention to both the specific incident and the broader issues it represented. Marcus approached the group with Major Ramirez at his side, noting the teenagers' nervous but determined expressions. They stood straighter upon seeing him, an unconscious response to his natural authority despite his civilian clothes and specialized cane. "Good morning," he greeted them, his tone professional but not unfriendly. "I see you're ready to begin your educational experience. Before we start, I want to clarify something important." He looked each teenager in the eye before continuing. "You're not here as punishment. You're here as citizens, learning about a vital part of your community that you haven't been exposed to before. The veterans you'll meet today have diverse political views, backgrounds, and personalities. Some will be friendly, others might be gruff. All have made sacrifices that fundamentally shaped their lives and protected the freedom you enjoy." He gestured toward the hospital entrance. "Your assignment today isn't to feel guilty or to perform sympathy. It's to listen, to assist where needed, and to understand. These men and women don't want your pity. They want your genuine engagement and respect. Can you provide that?" The teenagers nodded solemnly, Devon speaking for the group. "Yes, sir. We're here to learn." With that, Marcus led them into the facility, Major Ramirez accompanying them in her full dress uniform, a visible reminder of the continuity between past and present service members. The hospital administrator had prepared a structured orientation program that would expose the volunteers to different aspects of veteran care and experience. The news crew filmed the initial orientation before respectfully withdrawing from patient areas, understanding that veterans' dignity took precedence over media coverage. They would return later for interviews about the broader community initiative that was emerging from yesterday's incident. Throughout the morning, Marcus observed the teenagers' gradual transformation as they moved from initial awkwardness to genuine engagement. Tyler, who had suggested throwing Marcus's cane into the pond, was now patiently helping a Vietnam-era Army veteran with limited mobility navigate the complex paperwork required to access enhanced prosthetic benefits. Devon found himself in deep conversation with a retired Navy corpsman whose combat medical service in Afghanistan had left him with both physical scars and profound wisdom about human resilience. During the lunch break, Marcus found Devon sitting quietly in the hospital courtyard, seemingly deep in thought. Recognizing a teachable moment, he joined the young man at his table. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" Marcus observed, noting Devon's pensive expression. The teenager nodded. "I've been talking with Mr. Rodriguez, the corpsman who served in Kandahar. He showed me pictures of his unit, told me about the friends he lost." Devon looked up, his eyes reflecting genuine emotion. "He doesn't seem angry or bitter. After what he's been through, I don't understand how that's possible." Marcus considered this thoughtfully. Hardship can make people bitter, or it can forge something stronger than bitterness. For many who've served, there's a perspective that comes from facing the fragility of life directly, an understanding that each day is valuable, each connection meaningful. He gestured toward the hospital around them. These veterans aren't defined solely by their service or their injuries. They're complete human beings with the same range of emotions and responses as anyone else. What they share is the experience of having committed themselves to something larger than their own comfort or convenience. Devon was quiet for a moment before responding. "Yesterday, when all the Marines showed up at the park, I was just scared of getting in trouble. But today, talking with these veterans, I feel ashamed of how we acted, not because someone's making me feel bad, but because I'm starting to understand what we were actually disrespecting. That understanding is the whole point of this experience," Marcus affirmed, "and the fact that you're feeling it suggests you're engaging honestly with the opportunity." As they prepared to return to their duties, Devon asked a question that surprised Marcus with its sincerity. "Captain Winters, do you think someone like me could ever serve in the Marines or somewhere else?" Marcus studied the young man thoughtfully. "The military isn't for everyone, and there are many ways to serve your community and country, but if you're asking whether your past mistakes disqualify you, the answer is no. Many who've worn the uniform started their journey after similar moments of realization about the person they wanted to become." The afternoon session introduced the volunteers to a creative arts therapy program where veterans used various artistic mediums to process their experiences. The teenagers and Richard Atherton found themselves participating alongside veterans in a collaborative mural project representing different eras of service and homecoming experiences. By day's end, the initial educational experience had evolved into something more organic and meaningful than anyone had anticipated. The administrators reported that veteran participants had responded positively to the genuine interest shown by the young volunteers, with several requesting that the program continue beyond the original commitment. As Marcus prepared to depart with Major Ramirez, the hospital director approached, with Councilwoman Reeves, who had arrived for the closing interviews with the news crew. "Captain Winters, today has exceeded all expectations," the director began. "These young volunteers have shown remarkable engagement and sensitivity. Several of our regular therapists have noticed veterans participating who normally decline group activities. Councilwoman Reeves added, "The community response continues to grow. We've received offers of support from 6 local businesses wanting to sponsor expanded veteran engagement programs. The school board has requested a meeting to discuss incorporating veteran speakers into their civic education curriculum." She handed Marcus an updated proposal reflecting these developments. "Your educational approach has catalyzed something important here. This is growing beyond a response to one incident into a genuine community movement." As they concluded their conversation, the news crew prepared for the final interviews of the day. The reporter, a thoughtful woman in her 30s, approached Marcus with respect. "Captain Winters, we'd like to include your perspective on how yesterday's incident has evolved into today's initiatives. Would you be willing to share a few thoughts?" "On camera?" Marcus, typically averse to publicity, recognized the potential value in shaping the narrative around veteran engagement. He agreed to a brief statement, stepping carefully before the camera with Major Ramirez standing respectfully nearby. "Yesterday's incident reflected a disconnect that exists in many communities," he began, his natural dignity conveying authority, "without effort. Young people who have never encountered military service firsthand sometimes lack context for understanding what veterans have experienced and contributed." He gestured toward the teenagers, now helping to clean up the art therapy room alongside the veterans they'd worked with all day. These young men could have been defined by one moment of poor judgment. Instead, they're demonstrating that education and engagement can transform perspectives. That's not just about respecting veterans. It's about understanding the values of service, sacrifice, and community responsibility that strengthen our nation. The reporter then asked what he hoped would come from the expanded community initiative being developed. "My hope is that we build sustainable connections between generations," Marcus replied, "that young people understand their freedom and opportunities didn't materialize from nothing but were secured through the commitments and sacrifices of others, and that veterans find meaningful ways to continue their service by sharing their experiences and wisdom with the community they helped protect." As the interview concluded, Marcus noticed Devon and his father speaking earnestly with Lieutenant Colonel Barrett, who had arrived quietly during the afternoon session. The three seemed engaged in serious conversation, with Barrett occasionally nodding in response to questions from both Athertons. Later, as Major Ramirez drove Marcus home, she filled him in on that conversation. Devon was asking about the Young Marines program and potential pathways to service. His father had questions about how to better support veterans in his corporate role. The lieutenant colonel was quite impressed with their sincerity. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the right response at the right moment can redirect more than just individual lives. It can shift an entire community's understanding of its values and responsibilities. As they approached his home, they noticed something unexpected. His front yard had been transformed. The rose garden that Marcus had planted for Eleanor now featured a professionally installed watering system, fresh mulch, and additional plantings that complemented the original design. A discreet plaque had been placed at the garden's edge, reading, "In honor of Eleanor Winters, and with gratitude to Captain Marcus Winters for their service to our nation and community." Standing nearby was a landscape designer who stepped forward as Marcus carefully exited the vehicle. "Mr. Atherton arranged this as a surprise," she explained, handing Marcus a handwritten note. "He mentioned that tending this garden was important to you, but had become physically challenging. The system is designed to reduce the maintenance burden while preserving your personal connection to the space." The note from Richard Atherton was brief but meaningful. a small token of appreciation for the invaluable lesson you've provided our family. Some debts can never be fully repaid, but meaningful acknowledgement is a place to start. As Major, Ramirez helped Marcus inspect the thoughtful modifications to Eleanor's garden. His expression remained composed, but the significance of the gesture was evident in his careful attention to each detail. The memorial aspect of the garden had been respected and enhanced rather than altered, a demonstration of genuine understanding rather than superficial atonement. "They're learning," Marcus observed quietly. "Not just about veterans, but about honoring what matters to others." Major Ramirez nodded in agreement. "That's the difference between enforced apology and genuine transformation. One satisfies an immediate requirement. The other changes how people move through the world going forward." As evening approached, Major Ramirez prepared to depart, promising to return the following morning for Marcus's next VA hospital volunteer shift. The structured transportation support would continue for the duration needed for his leg to recover from the additional strain caused by the incident. The Marine Corps taking care of its own without fanfare or unnecessary attention. Before leaving, she handed Marcus an official envelope bearing the Marine Corps seal. "From Lieutenant Colonel Barrett, sir. He asked me to deliver this personally." Inside, Marcus found a formal letter acknowledging the educational impact of the response to the park incident and inviting him to address the next graduating class of Marine Security Forces at their completion ceremony. Barrett had noted that the graduates would benefit from hearing directly from the veteran whose dignity and wisdom had transformed a moment of disrespect into a community-wide recommitment to core values. As darkness fell over Harborview, Marcus sat in his favorite chair beside the front window, observing the soft landscape lighting now illuminating Eleanor's garden. The day's events had unfolded in ways he could not have anticipated when he first requested the Marine Corps' educational intervention. What had begun as a response to disrespect had catalyzed multiple forms of healing and connection between generations, between civilian and military communities, between individuals and their better selves. The teenagers were finding purpose. In service, their parents were reconsidering their roles in shaping community values, and veterans who had felt forgotten were experiencing renewed recognition and engagement. Marcus's phone chimed with a message from the VA hospital director. The 4 teenagers had requested to continue their volunteer service indefinitely, and 3 additional high school students had applied to join the program after seeing the news coverage. The educational ripples were continuing to spread outward, touching lives beyond those directly involved in the original incident. In that quiet moment of reflection, Marcus felt Eleanor's presence particularly strongly. She had always believed in the power of education over punishment, of transformation over retribution. The garden that honored her was now flourishing with new care, just as the values they had both served were finding renewed expression in their community. "Mission continuing, Elle," he murmured to her memory, his voice soft in the evening stillness. "Not just accomplished, but expanding in ways we couldn't have imagined." 3 weeks after the incident at Harborview Park, the community gathered for an event that would have seemed unlikely before that pivotal afternoon. The local high school auditorium was filled to capacity, with additional attendees watching via live stream in the cafeteria and gymnasium. At center stage stood Captain Marcus Winters, his posture military straight despite his specialized cane, addressing the inaugural session of the Harborview Intergenerational Service Initiative. "True strength," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the auditorium without need of amplification, "isn't measured by physical dominance or social position. It's demonstrated in how we treat those who are vulnerable, how we respond when we're wrong, and how we use whatever power we have to lift others rather than elevate ourselves." His gaze swept across the audience, a remarkable cross-section of the community, including veterans from every modern conflict, students from elementary through high school, local officials, business leaders, and families. In the front row sat Devon, Tyler, and the other two teenagers who had begun this journey as antagonists, but now served as founding youth ambassadors for the program. 3 weeks ago, an unfortunate incident in a park revealed a disconnect in our community, a gap in understanding between those who have served and the young people who benefit from that service without fully comprehending its nature or cost. Today, we begin the formal work of bridging that gap, not through obligation or guilt, but through authentic engagement and mutual respect. Marcus gestured to the side of the stage, where Lieutenant Colonel Barrett and Major Ramirez stood in, their dress blues alongside Councilwoman Reeves and Richard Atherton. This initiative represents a collaboration between military, civilian, government, and private sectors, each contributing unique perspective and resources toward our shared goal of strengthening community bonds through understanding. The program that had evolved from the park incident had expanded far beyond anyone's initial vision. What began as a corrective educational experience for 4 teenagers had catalyzed a community-wide examination of how civilians and veterans interacted or failed to interact in daily life. The resulting initiative included educational components for schools, service opportunities for youth, resources for veterans, and community-building events designed to foster genuine connection. Today, Marcus continued, we launch 5 specific programs that will continue year-round. He outlined each initiative with precision. First, the Veterans in Classrooms program would bring service members from different eras to share firsthand accounts with students, contextualizing historical events and demonstrating the human dimension of service beyond textbook descriptions. Second, the Youth Service Corps would match students with veterans for community improvement projects, working side by side to address local needs while building intergenerational relationships. Third, the Veterans Resource Navigator program would train volunteers to help veterans access available services and benefits, reducing bureaucratic obstacles through practical advocacy. Fourth, the Oral History Project would professionally record and archive veterans' experiences, creating a permanent community resource for future generations. Finally, the Restored Dignity Fund would provide emergency assistance to veterans facing challenges that threaten their independence or well-being, with support tailored to preserve their autonomy and self-respect. As Marcus concluded the formal presentation, he introduced Devon and Tyler, who stepped forward with poised confidence that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Our journey with this initiative began with a mistake, Devon acknowledged, his voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes upon him. But Captain Winters and Lieutenant Colonel Barrett offered us education instead of just punishment. They showed us that respect isn't just about saying the right words, it's about understanding the experiences and sacrifices behind those words. Tyler continued, we've spent the past 3 weeks volunteering at the VA hospital, listening to veterans' stories and learning what service actually means. We've realized that freedom and opportunity aren't automatic. They're secured through commitments made by real people who put community above self-interest. The 2 young men then unveiled the initiative symbol, a simple but powerful design, featuring hands of different ages, joined in mutual support, with the motto "Strength through Understanding" emblazoned below. The logo would appear on program materials, volunteer shirts, and community event banners, visually reinforcing the core message of intergenerational connection. Following the formal presentation, the auditorium transformed into an interactive exhibition where veterans from different service eras staffed information stations, sharing artifacts, photographs, and experiences with circulating community members. The atmosphere blended educational seriousness with genuine warmth as artificial barriers between groups began to dissolve through direct engagement. Marcus moved carefully through the exhibition, pausing frequently to facilitate introductions or provide context. Despite his physical discomfort, his injured leg still troubling him after the park incident, his evident satisfaction in the community's response provided energizing purpose. At one station, he observed Devon's father deep in conversation with a Vietnam-era veteran who had received inadequate support upon his return decades earlier. Richard Atherton was taking detailed notes, his corporate efficiency now directed toward identifying systemic issues faced by veterans in the community and potential solutions his business connections might help implement. Nearby, Tyler was showing a group of middle school students how to properly fold an American flag under the guidance of an elderly female veteran who had served as one of the first women integrated into previously all-male units. The teenagers, who had once mocked military precision, now demonstrated respectful attention to detail as they absorbed her instruction. Councilwoman Reeves approached Marcus, clipboard in hand, her expression reflecting both satisfaction and determination. "The response has exceeded all projections, Captain. We've registered over 200 volunteer commitments today alone, and 7 additional businesses have pledged support." She handed him a document showing the initiative's organizational structure and sustainability plan. The City Council has approved 3 years of baseline funding with matching grants from the business community. This isn't just a temporary response to one incident, it's becoming a permanent part of Harborview's identity. As they discussed implementation details, they were joined by Dr. Elena Vasquez, the VA hospital's Director of Therapeutic Services, whose professional skepticism had been transformed by the results of the teenagers' volunteer work. "The impact on our veterans has been remarkable," she reported. "Participants in our PTSD support groups are showing measurable improvements in community reintegration metrics. Several who had isolated themselves for years are now volunteering as mentors in the youth program." She smiled as she added, "And Devon has shown such natural ability in his volunteer role that we'd like to offer him a paid weekend position as a patient activities coordinator. His rapport with our most withdrawn veterans is something special. They respond to his genuine interest and lack of pity." The exhibition continued into the evening, with planned activities giving way to organic conversations as community members discovered unexpected connections. A retired Marine found himself in deep discussion with a high school teacher about developing more accurate curriculum materials on recent conflicts. A Vietnam veteran discovered that his new neighbor was the daughter of a man who had served in his same unit decades earlier. As the event drew to a close, Lieutenant Colonel Barrett joined Marcus near the auditorium exit, both men observing the lingering group still engaged in earnest conversation despite the late hour. "Mission exceeding expectations, wouldn't you say, Captain?" Barrett remarked quietly. Marcus nodded, shifting his weight to ease the pressure on his injured leg. "The response has been substantial, more than I anticipated." Barrett studied the older officer thoughtfully. "You know, when we deployed those vehicles to the park that day, some of my junior officers questioned whether the response was disproportionate to the offense. I explained that sometimes the scale of the response isn't about punishment, it's about demonstrating the weight of the values being defended." He gestured toward the community members still engaged throughout the auditorium. "Looking at this, I'd say the proportions were exactly right. Sometimes people need to see that certain principles matter enough to warrant extraordinary measures." As they spoke, a journalist who had been covering the initiative's development approached with a photographer. "Captain Winters, would you be willing to take a photo with the 4 young men who helped launch this initiative. Their transformation has become an important part of this story. Marcus agreed, and moments later found himself standing with Devon, Tyler, and the other 2 teenagers whose act of disrespect had inadvertently catalyzed a community transformation. As they gathered for the photograph, Devon spoke quietly. "Sir, my application to the Naval Academy preparatory program is almost complete. Lieutenant Colonel Barrett has agreed to write a recommendation letter. I was wondering if you might consider writing one as well." The request revealed how profoundly the young man's aspirations had shifted in the weeks since their first encounter. From carelessly disrespecting a veteran to actively pursuing a path of service himself represented a transformation worth supporting. "I'd be honored to do so, Devon," Marcus replied. "Your actions these past weeks have demonstrated genuine character development." After the photograph, as the event finally concluded, Major Ramirez approached to coordinate Marcus's transportation home. "Your driver is ready whenever you are, Captain, though there's something you should know before we depart." Her tone carried a hint of suppressed excitement that piqued Marcus's curiosity. "Oh? There's been a development at your residence, sir. Nothing concerning," she quickly assured him, "but definitely unexpected. I think you'll want to see for yourself." The drive to Marcus's home was relatively quiet, the day's events having left him thoughtfully contemplative. When they arrived, he immediately understood Major Ramirez's cryptic comment. His modest craftsman home was illuminated not just by the usual porch light, but by the headlights of nearly a dozen vehicles parked along the street. Marine Corps transports interspersed with civilian cars bearing military service decals. On his front lawn stood a group of Marines in their dress blues, formed in a perfect ceremonial line, flanked by veterans of various ages in civilian attire. At their center waited a distinguished figure Marcus recognized immediately: General Howard Lancaster, the commanding general of Marine Corps Base Quantico, who had flown in specifically for this occasion. As Marcus carefully exited the vehicle, supported by Major Ramirez, the assembled Marines came to attention in a synchronized movement that spoke of countless hours of disciplined practice. General Lancaster stepped forward, his bearing impeccable, his expression one of profound respect. "Captain Winters," he began formally, "I've come on behalf of the Commandant to personally convey the Corps' appreciation for your continued service to Marine values and traditions. Your handling of the recent incident and its transformation into a community initiative exemplifies the leadership principles that define our finest officers." He gestured to a Marine who stepped forward bearing a polished wooden case. "The Commandant has authorized me to present you with the Distinguished Public Service Award, the highest civilian honor the Marine Corps can bestow. Your actions have strengthened not only your local community, but the broader relationship between veterans and the public they served." Marcus stood perfectly still, momentarily overwhelmed by the unexpected recognition. Throughout his career and retirement, he had never sought accolades, finding satisfaction in duty fulfilled rather than external validation. This gesture, however, represented something beyond personal recognition. It acknowledged the importance of the values he had sought to defend and transmit to younger generations. With measured dignity, he accepted the award, offering a textbook-perfect salute that belied his years and physical limitations. "The honor is appreciated, General, but the credit belongs to many. Lieutenant Colonel Barrett, Major Ramirez, the community leadership, and even the young men whose mistake became an opportunity for growth." General Lancaster smiled slightly. "Taking credit is never your style, Marcus. That's precisely why the Commandant insisted on this recognition." Following the formal presentation, the gathering transitioned to Marcus's backyard, where Marines and veterans mingled in the kind of relaxed camaraderie that transcends rank and era of service. Tables had appeared bearing food and refreshments, transforming the impromptu ceremony into a celebration of community and shared values. As Marcus made his way through the gathering, accepting congratulations and sharing stories, he found himself continually struck by the unexpected connections that had formed in the wake of the park incident. Devon's father was deep in conversation with General Lancaster about corporate support for veteran hiring initiatives. Councilwoman Reeves was discussing municipal veterans programs with a group of retired officers whose combined experience could substantially improve local services. Later in the evening, as the celebration continued, Marcus found a moment of quiet on his back porch, temporarily stepping away from the steady stream of well-wishers. Major Ramirez joined him briefly, offering a fresh cup of coffee. "Quite a journey from that day in the park, wouldn't you say, Captain?" she observed. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "When I made that call, I was thinking about a specific educational moment for 4 teenagers I never anticipated." He gestured toward the gathering. "All of this. That's the thing about righteous actions," Ramirez replied. "They tend to create ripples beyond their immediate impact. Those teenagers disrespected one veteran, but the response has benefited hundreds." She hesitated before adding, "The Commandant mentioned something else when authorizing this recognition. He said your handling of this situation would be incorporated into leadership training at Officer Candidate School, a case study in how to effectively transmit core values to civilians who may not fully understand the nature of service." This news affected Marcus more deeply than the award itself. The thought that his approach might influence future generations of Marine officers, shaping how they would eventually bridge the military-civilian divide in their own communities, represented a form of legacy he had never consciously sought but profoundly valued. As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, General Lancaster had a final private word with Marcus. "The initiative you've helped create here has caught the attention of the Secretary of Defense. There's interest in developing it as a model program that could be implemented in communities nationwide." He handed Marcus a folder containing preliminary information about a potential expansion. "Should you be willing, there would be a role for you as a consultant in adapting this approach to diverse communities. Your perspective as both the catalyst and architect of this initiative would be invaluable." Marcus accepted the folder with measured interest. "I'll consider it carefully, General. The principles are certainly transferable, though each community would require thoughtful adaptation." After the last guests had departed and Marcus was finally alone in his home, he found himself drawn to Eleanor's photograph on the mantel. He picked it up carefully, studying the familiar beloved features of the woman who had shared his journey through military service and into retirement. "You'd approve of how this has unfolded, Elle," he said quietly to the image. "Remember how you always said the most important battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in the hearts and minds of our own communities. This feels like one of those victories." He replaced the photograph gently before moving to his study, where he now opened General Lancaster's folder. The proposed national initiative would create a framework for communities to develop their own intergenerational service programs, using the Harborview model as a template while allowing for local adaptation. The potential impact was substantial, thousands of veterans finding renewed purpose through community engagement, countless young people gaining deeper understanding of service and sacrifice, communities strengthening their internal bonds through shared values and activities. As dawn approached, Marcus completed his review of the proposal and began drafting initial recommendations. His injured leg protested the long hours at his desk, but the pain seemed insignificant compared to the opportunity before him. What had begun with a moment of disrespect in a park had evolved into a potential national movement for veteran integration and civic education. Later that morning, as Marcus prepared for his regular volunteer shift at the VA hospital, he received a text message from Devon. Captain Winters just wanted to let you know that all 4 of us have officially enrolled in the Young Marines program. Tyler's even talking about applying to Annapolis next year. Thank you for showing us a better path. Marcus smiled at the message, recognizing it as perhaps the most meaningful outcome of the entire sequence of events. 4 young lives redirected toward service rather than self-interest, toward respect rather than arrogance, toward community rather than isolation. No award or recognition could match the significance of that transformation. When Major Ramirez arrived to provide transportation to the VA hospital, she found Marcus already waiting on his porch, his expression reflecting quiet satisfaction despite his obvious physical discomfort. "You're looking particularly resolved this morning, Captain," she observed as she helped him navigate the porch steps. "I've been considering General Lancaster's proposal," Marcus replied. "I believe there's merit in developing this initiative for broader implementation. The disconnect we identified here exists in communities nationwide." As they drove toward the VA hospital, they passed Harborview Park, the site of the original incident now transformed in meaning through the community's response. Where once Marcus had experienced disrespect and pain, the park now represented the beginning of a journey toward greater understanding and connection. "You know," Major Ramirez remarked, following his gaze toward the park, "when I first witnessed those teenagers harassing you, I was furious. I wanted them to face serious consequences. But you saw beyond punishment to possibility." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "In 32 years of service, I learned that lasting change rarely comes from fear or force alone. It comes from helping people understand the why behind the expectations we set." At the VA hospital, they found the 4 teenagers already engaged in their volunteer duties, each working alongside veterans with evident respect and genuine interest. Devon was assisting an elderly Marine with physical therapy exercises, demonstrating a gentle patience that would have seemed impossible in the arrogant youth who had kicked away Marcus's cane just weeks earlier. Dr. Vasquez greeted Marcus with evident enthusiasm. "Your young protégés have become our most reliable volunteers, Captain, and they've inspired others. We've had 15 new youth volunteer applications this week alone." Throughout the morning, Marcus observed the organic interactions between veterans and young volunteers, noting how artificial barriers of age and experience dissolved through shared activities and authentic conversation. Veterans who had isolated themselves for years were now sharing stories they had previously kept buried. Young people who had viewed military service as an abstract concept were now engaging with its human reality and finding unexpected connection. During the lunch break, Marcus joined a table where Devon and Tyler were deep in conversation with 2 Vietnam-era veterans about the nature of courage and fear in combat situations. The teenagers listened with genuine respect as the older men shared insights that textbooks could never capture. The complex reality of human experience under extreme pressure, the bonds formed through shared hardship, the weight of decisions made in uncertain circumstances. "The thing nobody tells you," one veteran was explaining, "is that courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about acting with integrity despite that fear. Sometimes the bravest thing looks simple from the outside, just doing what needs to be done when everything in you wants to run the other way." Devon nodded thoughtfully. "Like what Captain Winters did in Fallujah, pulling his Marines to safety while injured himself." The veteran smiled. "Exactly. And like what he did with you boys too, in a different way. Taking a bad situation and finding the constructive path forward, instead of just reacting from anger. That's moral courage. As Marcus observed this exchange, he realized that the educational opportunity he had requested that day in the park had expanded far beyond its original scope. The teenagers were not merely learning about respect for veterans, they were absorbing fundamental principles of character and citizenship that would shape their approach to challenges throughout their lives. The transformation that had begun with 4 teenagers had expanded to include their families, then their schools, then the broader community, and now potentially communities nationwide. The response that Lieutenant Colonel Barrett had questioned as possibly disproportionate had proven to be precisely calibrated to catalyze meaningful, sustainable change. As the afternoon's activities concluded, Marcus found himself standing near the VA hospital's memorial garden, where a small granite monument honored those who had served in conflicts across generations. Devon approached quietly, respectful of Marcus's contemplative moment. "Captain Winters," he began hesitantly, "I wanted to thank you again, not just for giving us a second chance, but for showing us what real strength looks like. Before all, this I thought strength was about dominance or intimidation. Now I understand it's about standing for something meaningful, even when that's difficult." Marcus nodded, recognizing the genuine growth in the young man's perspective. "That understanding is worth more than any apology, Devon. Take it forward into whatever path you choose." As they walked back toward the hospital entrance, Devon added, "The Marine motto, Semper Fidelis, I've been thinking about what that really means. It's not just about loyalty to the core, is it? It's about fidelity to principles and to each other. Always faithful," Marcus confirmed, "to mission, to values, to one another, in service and beyond." Major Ramirez was waiting to transport Marcus home, her crisp marine bearing softened by evident respect for the ongoing transformation she had witnessed. "Ready when you are, Captain." As they departed, Marcus took a final glance at the hospital where 4 teenagers who had once mocked a veteran now served with growing understanding. The educational mission that had begun with a moment of disrespect had evolved into something far more profound, a community recommitting to the values of service, sacrifice, and mutual respect that transcended generational boundaries. "Mission continuing, Major," Marcus observed quietly, his gaze taking in both the immediate scene and its broader implications. Sometimes the most important victories aren't won through confrontation, but through connection. The response that had surrounded Harborview Park that day had been about more than addressing one incident of disrespect. It had been about surrounding a community with the visible manifestation of values too often left unstated, reminding citizens of all ages that some principles warranted extraordinary measures to defend and transmit to future generations. 3 months later, when the Harborview Intergenerational Service Initiative held its first formal graduation ceremony for youth volunteers completing their initial service commitment, Captain Marcus Winters stood alongside Lieutenant Colonel Barrett to present certificates of completion. Among the graduates were Devon, Tyler, and the 2 other teenagers whose journey had begun with a cruel impulse in a park, but had transformed into genuine commitment to service. As Marcus handed Devon his certificate, the young man came to attention and offered a perfect salute, not a requirement of the ceremony, but a spontaneous gesture of respect that spoke volumes about his personal transformation. Marcus returned the salute with equal precision, the simple exchange embodying the restored dignity and mutual respect that had emerged from that pivotal moment in Harborview Park. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in the power of transformation, and that respect for our veterans strengthens the very foundation of our communities. Their honor is our responsibility, not just to defend when challenged, but to understand, appreciate, and preserve for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't. Want to pass these up? Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.